Picture this. It's 3:17 a.m. on a random Tuesday, and I'm sitting on my dorm room floor in yesterday's mascara and a hoodie that's seen better days. My laptop screen is the only light in the room, casting this weird blue glow across piles of skincare products that promised to transform my life, but somehow left me looking more tired than before. I'd been scrolling for hours down one of those internet rabbit holes that starts with quick study break and ends with you questioning your entire existence. You know the ones. First, it was TikTok, then YouTube, then some wellness blog I'd never heard of, and now I'm staring at this page that's making the boldest claim I've ever seen. Rewire your subconscious mind while you sleep and wake up as your highest self in just 60 days. Yeah, right. But here's the thing about being desperate at 3 a.m., you'll consider anything, and I was desperate. Not in a dramatic life or death way, but in that quiet, exhausting way where you've tried everything and nothing sticks. The skincare routines, the workout plans, the affirmations in the mirror that made me feel ridiculous. I downloaded every habit tracker, bought every supplement, followed every influencer's morning routine. Nothing worked, not really. I kept ending up right back here, scrolling through other people's transformations, wondering what they had that I didn't. What was I missing? Why did everyone else seem to have this natural confidence, this glow, this ability to just be the main character of their own life? That's when I found it. Sleep hypnosis for glow-ups. Now, I know what you're thinking. Trust me, I thought the same thing. It sounds like some new age nonsense that desperate people fall for at 3 a.m. But as I kept reading, something shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the fact that I'd literally tried everything else. But for the first time in months, I felt curious instead of cynical. The premise was simple. While you sleep, your subconscious mind is wide open, processing everything from the day and basically rewiring itself. Most of the time, it's just replaying your insecurities, your limiting beliefs, all the ways you think you're not enough. But what if you could redirect that? What if instead of spending 8 hours unconsciously reinforcing all your self-doubt, you could spend those same 8 hours programming confidence, self-love, and that unshakable that girl energy? The science actually made sense. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's vividly imagined when you're in that state between wake and sleep. It's why you can wake up from a dream feeling genuinely heartbroken or terrified or ridiculously happy. Your subconscious experienced it as real. To understand why I was so desperate to try something as unconventional as sleep hypnosis, you need to know where I was mentally when I found it. Because this wasn't my first attempt at a glow up, not even close. It was actually my 7th. I kept a list on my phone, not intentionally, but because I'm the type of person who screenshots everything and never deletes anything. Buried in my camera roll were the remnants of every transformation attempt that had crashed and burned over the past 2 years. The 75 hard challenge that I quit on day 12. The skincare routine that cost me 3 months of coffee money and left my face looking angrier than before. The morning routine I found on Pinterest that required waking up at 5 a.m. to journal, meditate, work out, and make a smoothie bowl before 8 a.m. classes. I lasted exactly 4 days. There was the capsule wardrobe phase, where I donated half my clothes only to realize I had nothing to wear. The yoga challenge that ended with me crying in child's pose because I couldn't touch my toes. The habit tracker app that sent me increasingly passive-aggressive notifications until I deleted it out of shame. Each time, I started with this incredible momentum. I'd spend hours researching, making Pinterest boards, ordering products, planning everything down to the minute. I'd feel so motivated, so ready to become this new version of myself. And each time, I'd hit a wall around week 2 and slowly slip back into my old patterns until I was exactly where I started. Except now, with less money and more evidence that I was somehow broken. The worst part wasn't the failure itself, it was the story I started telling myself about why I kept failing. Other girls seemed to effortlessly transform themselves. They'd post their before and afters, their morning routines, their how I glowed up videos, and make it look so natural, so sustainable. What was wrong with me that I couldn't stick to anything? I started to believe I was just one of those people who wasn't meant to be confident or beautiful or magnetic. Like some people are born with the glow up gene and others aren't. I was clearly in the latter category. This belief showed up everywhere, in how I hunched my shoulders walking across campus, in how I said sorry before speaking up in class, in how I automatically assumed any guy talking to me was just being nice, not actually interested, in how I spent Saturday nights scrolling through other people's lives instead of creating my own. I lived in this constant state of waiting for my life to begin, waiting to feel confident enough to raise my hand in class, waiting to feel pretty enough to go to parties, waiting to feel worthy enough to believe that good things could happen to me too. But here's what I didn't realize at the time. I wasn't failing because I lacked willpower or discipline. I was failing because I was fighting against my own subconscious programming. Let me explain what I mean. Every time I tried to implement a new routine or habit, I was essentially asking my conscious mind to override years of subconscious conditioning. My subconscious mind had been programmed since childhood to believe certain things about who I was and what I deserved. And the subconscious mind's primary job isn't to make you happy, it's to keep you safe and consistent. To your subconscious, consistent means familiar, even if familiar is miserable. So every time I tried to wake up early and work out, my subconscious would flood me with every excuse to stay in bed. Every time I tried to eat healthier, it would create cravings for exactly the foods I was trying to avoid. Every time I tried to speak up more confidently, it would replay every embarrassing moment from middle school to keep me quiet. This is why willpower-based transformation is so exhausting and unsustainable. You're literally fighting a civil war in your own mind, and the subconscious always wins eventually because it doesn't get tired the way your conscious willpower does. I didn't understand any of this when I was lying on my dorm room floor at 3 a.m., but I could feel the truth of it. I was exhausted from fighting myself, tired of starting over every Monday, sick of being the girl who had potential but never seemed to actualize it. That's the headspace I was in when the TikTok algorithm served me a video that would change everything. It was this girl, probably around my age, talking about her glow up journey, but she wasn't showing workout routines or skincare products. She was talking about something called subconscious reprogramming and how she transformed her entire life by changing her beliefs while she slept. I used to be the girl who tried every single self-improvement hack and failed at all of them, she said, looking directly into the camera with this calm confidence I'd never seen before. Then I realized I was trying to build a new life on top of an old foundation. You can't build a mansion on quicksand. She explained how she had discovered sleep hypnosis, not the weird, swinging watch kind, but modern neuroscience-based programs designed to reprogram limiting beliefs during the most receptive state your brain ever reaches, the theta brainwave state right before sleep. Instead of forcing myself to change during the day, I let my subconscious do the work while I slept, she continued. After 60 days, I didn't have to try to be confident anymore, I just was. Something about her energy was different from other transformation content I'd seen. She wasn't hyping herself up or trying to convince me of anything, she was just sharing her experience in this matter-of-fact way that felt genuine. But what really caught my attention was when she said, the best part? You literally don't have to do anything during the day. No morning routines, no habit tracking, no forcing yourself to think positive thoughts. You just press play and go to sleep. After years of failing at complex routines and strict disciplines, the simplicity was appealing. But more than that, it addressed the root of my problem, my subconscious beliefs about myself. I spent the next 3 hours going down the rabbit hole of sleep hypnosis research. I found studies showing how the brain processes information differently during theta states. I read about how professional athletes use visualization and hypnosis to improve performance. I discovered that most of our personality and behavior patterns are determined by subconscious programming we received before age 7. The more I learned, the more everything clicked into place. Of course, I couldn't stick to morning routines when my subconscious believed I was not a morning person. Of course, I sabotaged my healthy eating when my subconscious equated food restriction with deprivation and punishment. Of course, I stayed quiet in social situations when my subconscious was convinced that speaking up would lead to rejection or embarrassment. I wasn't weak or broken, I was just trying to change the wrong thing. All those failed glow-up attempts had been focused on changing my actions and behaviors. But actions flow from beliefs, and beliefs live in the subconscious mind. I'd been trying to reprogram the software while the operating system remained unchanged. By 2:30 a.m., I was convinced that sleep hypnosis was at least worth trying. But it wasn't until I found the specific program I would eventually use that I felt ready to actually commit. The website looked professional, but not overly polished. The creator was a certified hypnotherapist who specialized in confidence and self-worth programming for young women. She shared her own transformation story, how she'd struggled with self-doubt and comparison throughout college until she discovered the power of subconscious reprogramming. What sold me wasn't the before and after photos or the testimonials, though those were compelling. It was a 60-day money-back guarantee and the detailed explanation of what to expect each week. Week 1, foundation building. Your subconscious begins to accept new beliefs about your worth and potential. Week 2, resistance and release. Old patterns surface to be cleared, which can feel temporarily uncomfortable. Week 3, integration. New beliefs start to feel natural and automatic. Week 4, momentum. Changes become visible to others. The program was honest about the process not being linear. It warned that some nights would feel more impactful than others, that old insecurities might initially get louder as they were being cleared, that real transformation takes time even when you're working directly with the subconscious. This transparency felt refreshing after so many programs that promised instant results with zero effort. This one was promising profound results, but with the caveat that profound change requires patience and consistency, even if that consistency was just pressing play each night. I bought it at 3:47 a.m. The first track was titled Foundation and Self-Worth, Remembering Who You Really Are. The description explained that this track would begin installing new core beliefs about your inherent value, beauty, and capability, while gently dissolving old patterns of self-criticism and doubt. I downloaded all 8 tracks immediately, then set up my sleep space for what I hoped would be the beginning of my actual transformation. I cleared the clutter from my nightstand, charged my phone, and found my most comfortable earbuds. Looking back, that night felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The girl who had tried and failed at 7 different glow-up approaches was about to try an 8th, but this time, instead of trying to force change through willpower and discipline, she was going to trust her subconscious mind to do what it does best: absorb new information and make it feel real. As I settled into bed with my earbuds in and the first track queued up, I had no idea what I was about to experience over the next 8 weeks. I didn't know about the vivid dreams, the unexpected emotional releases, the mornings when I'd wake up feeling like a different person. I didn't know that my subconscious would put up a fight before it surrendered to the new programming. I had no clue that changing your beliefs about yourself at such a deep level would affect everything. How I walked, how I spoke, how I breathed, how I took up space in the world. All I knew was that I was tired of being the girl who started strong and faded fast. I was ready to try something that worked with my mind instead of against it. I pressed play and closed my eyes, not knowing that I was about to discover what happens when you stop fighting your subconscious and start reprogramming it instead. So theoretically, if you listen to carefully crafted hypnotic suggestions while falling asleep, suggestions about seeing yourself as beautiful, confident, radiant, worthy, your subconscious would start to believe it. And once your subconscious believes something, it starts looking for evidence to support that belief. It changes how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you show up in the world. Your outer transformation follows your inner transformation. I sat there reading testimonial after testimonial from girls my age who swore this changed their lives. Not just their confidence, but their actual physical appearance. Clearer skin, better posture, this magnetic energy that people couldn't ignore. They talked about waking up and just feeling different, lighter, more alive, like they'd finally stepped into who they were meant to be. Part of me wanted to close the laptop and go to bed. The rational part that had been disappointed too many times before, but there was this other part, this tiny spark of hope that I thought I'd lost, that whispered, what if this time is different? Here's what sold me. Unlike every other transformation program I'd tried, this one required literally zero effort during the day. No morning routines to remember, no habits to track, no willpower to maintain. You just press play and go to sleep. That's it. If it didn't work, I'd only wasted 60 nights of sleep that weren't exactly restful anyway. But if it did work, I thought about who I could become in 60 days. Not just how I might look, but how I might feel. Imagine walking into a room and not immediately scanning for the exits. Imagine looking in the mirror and genuinely liking what you see. Imagine having the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. Imagine being her, that version of yourself you've always known was there, waiting. The website promised I'd see changes within the first week. Subtle shifts in how I carried myself, how I responded to stress, how I felt in my own skin. By week 3, people would start noticing something different about me, even if they couldn't pinpoint what. By the end of 60 days, I'd be living as my highest self, not because I'd forced myself to change, but because my subconscious mind would finally believe I deserved to be her. It sounded too good to be true, but at 3:47 a.m., exhausted from another day of feeling like I was performing my own life instead of living it, I decided too good to be true was exactly what I needed. I bought the program. The download was instant, 8 different tracks, each designed for different weeks of the transformation. Week 1 was about foundation and self-worth. Week 2 focused on releasing limiting beliefs. Week 3 was embodying confidence, and so on, building layer by layer until week 8, integration and magnetism. Each track was about 45 minutes long, designed to play as you fell asleep. The voice was this soothing, almost hypnotic whisper that immediately made my eyelids heavy. There was subtle background music, these frequencies that were supposed to put your brain into the optimal state for reprogramming. I plugged in my earbuds, queued up foundation and self-worth, and pressed play. Take a deep breath and allow your body to sink into the mattress. The voice began. Tonight, as you sleep, your subconscious mind will begin to remember who you truly are. I don't remember falling asleep, which apparently was a good sign. According to the program, if you could remember the whole track, you weren't deep enough. The magic happened in that liminal space between consciousness and sleep, where your analytical mind finally shut up and your subconscious took over. I woke up the next morning feeling different. Not dramatically different, not like I'd been hit by some transformation lightning bolt, but different enough that I noticed. There was this subtle shift in my energy, like I'd had the best night's sleep in months, even though I'd only gotten about 5 hours. Usually my first thought upon waking was some variation of, ugh, another day. But that morning, I found myself thinking, I wonder what today will bring. It was such a small shift, but it felt huge. Looking back now, after completing the full 60 days, I can see that first morning was the beginning of everything. But in that moment, I had no idea I'd just taken the first step toward becoming someone I didn't even know was possible. Over the next 8 weeks, I would discover things about the power of the subconscious mind that they don't teach you in psychology class. I would learn that confidence isn't something you build through force of will, it's something you remember. That glow-ups aren't about changing who you are, but about finally becoming who you've always been, underneath all the doubt and fear. I would watch my reflection change in ways that had nothing to do with new skincare products or workout routines. My posture would straighten without me thinking about it. My skin would clear up during finals week instead of breaking out. I would start making eye contact with people, not because I forced myself to, but because it felt natural. But I would also discover that rewiring your subconscious isn't always comfortable. There would be weird dreams, unexpected emotional releases, days when I felt like I was losing my mind. The old version of me would fight back hard, trying to pull me into familiar patterns of self-doubt and playing small. I would learn that transformation isn't a straight line, and that your subconscious mind has some surprising ways of protecting you from change, even change you desperately want. By the end of week 1, my roommate would ask if I'd done something different with my hair. By week 3, guys who had never noticed me before would start conversations in the coffee shop. By week 5, I would look in the mirror and genuinely not recognize the person staring back at me. But the real transformation wasn't in how I looked. It was in how I felt about how I looked, how I moved through the world, how I spoke to myself, how I showed up in every single interaction, carrying this quiet certainty that I belonged wherever I was. The girl who pressed play on that first track at 3:47 a.m. had no idea she was about to embark on the most profound 60 days of her life. She thought she was just trying another glow-up hack that probably wouldn't work. She had no idea she was about to meet herself for the first time. But before I could become her, I had to survive what happened next. Because as I would learn over the following week, when you start messing with your subconscious programming, your subconscious doesn't just passively accept the new information, it fights back. The first night was honestly anticlimactic. I'd built up this expectation that I would feel something profound happening, like I'd wake up with sudden clarity about my worth or radiating confidence from every pore. Instead, I woke up feeling pretty much normal, except maybe slightly more rested than usual. The track had started with this gentle voice guiding me through progressive relaxation, telling me to release tension from my toes up to my head. I remember the transition into the actual hypnotic suggestions being seamless. One moment, I was consciously listening to affirmations about my inherent beauty and worth, and the next moment, my alarm was going off at 7:30 a.m. Day 1 felt like a letdown. I examined myself in the mirror, looking for any sign of change. Same face, same energy, same tendency to avoid eye contact with myself. Maybe I'd been scammed by a very expensive placebo effect. But then something weird happened on day 2. I was walking to my 9 a.m. psychology lecture, following my usual route across the quad, when I realized I wasn't hunching my shoulders against the cold like I normally did. My posture felt naturally straighter, more open. It wasn't like I was consciously thinking stand up straight. It just felt right to take up more space. Then in class, when Professor Chen asked a question about cognitive dissonance, my hand went up before my brain could talk me out of it. I actually answered out loud in front of 200 people. My voice didn't shake. I didn't apologize before speaking or end my statement like a question. I just answered. The girl sitting next to me, who I'd been having a silent semester-long acquaintance with, turned and said, "That was such a good point. Such a small thing, but I felt this little spark of pride that I hadn't experienced in months." Day 3 brought the dreams. I've always been someone who rarely remembers dreams, but that night I had the most vivid, bizarre sequence of scenes I'd ever experienced. I was back in high school, but instead of feeling invisible and awkward like I had in real life, I was walking through the hallways with this magnetic confidence. People were drawn to me, wanting to be around my energy. Then the scene shifted, and I was giving a presentation to my current classmates, but my voice was clear and strong, and everyone was genuinely engaged with what I was saying. I felt beautiful, not in a superficial way, but in this deep, unshakable way, like my beauty came from how alive and present I felt. I woke up from that dream feeling like I just experienced a preview of who I could become, but it also felt unsettling, like my brain was trying to process information that didn't match my current reality. Day 4 was when things got interesting. I woke up in the worst mood I'd had in weeks. Everything felt irritating. My roommate's music, the dining hall running out of the good coffee, the way my professor kept saying during lecture. I felt agitated and restless, like I was crawling out of my own skin. But here's the weird part. Even though I felt terrible emotionally, I looked better than I had in months. My skin had this subtle glow, like I'd been drinking more water or getting better sleep. My posture was still naturally straighter. When I walked past a group of guys from my dorm, one of them definitely checked me out. Not in a creepy way, just in that split-second glance that registers attraction. The contradiction between feeling awful and looking good was confusing. I almost stopped the program that night, convinced it was messing with my emotional stability. But I remembered something from the program materials about integration discomfort. The creator had warned that as new beliefs begin to install, old patterns sometimes surface more intensely before they are released. Like cleaning out a messy closet, things look worse before they look better. Day 5 brought clarity about what was actually happening. I was walking to the library when I caught my reflection in a store window and had this moment of genuine surprise. Who was that girl walking with such natural confidence? When had I started carrying myself like I belonged wherever I was going? Then it hit me. The irritation I'd been feeling wasn't random moodiness, it was resistance. My old self-image was fighting against the new programming, all those thoughts and beliefs about being average, invisible, not worth noticing. They were being challenged by new information my subconscious was receiving every night. The part of my mind that had kept me small and safe was panicking because safe meant predictable, and predictable meant staying exactly as I was. But the hypnosis was telling my subconscious a different story, that I was magnetic, confident, worthy of attention and respect. My conscious mind didn't know how to reconcile these two conflicting narratives, so it was creating emotional static. Understanding this made day 6 so much easier. When I woke up feeling anxious and self-critical, instead of thinking something was wrong with me, I recognized it as evidence that the program was working. My subconscious was literally rewiring itself, and rewiring always involves some temporary disruption. That evening, something shifted dramatically. I was at Target buying toothpaste, the most mundane possible errand, when the cashier, this cute guy, probably around my age, started an actual conversation with me. Not just, did you find everything okay? But genuine small talk about how busy campus was getting as we approached midterms. In my old reality, I would have answered politely but briefly, paid quickly, and left. But instead, I found myself actually engaging, smiling naturally, making eye contact, even light flirting. Nothing dramatic, just this playful energy that felt completely authentic. When he handed me my receipt, he said, "I hope you have a really great rest of your week," with this genuine warmth that made it clear he'd enjoyed our interaction. Walking to my car, I realized something profound had just happened. For the first time in my adult life, I had been fully present in a social interaction without monitoring myself or worrying about how I was coming across. I wasn't performing confidence or trying to be charming, I just was. Day 7 sealed the deal. I woke up early without an alarm, feeling genuinely excited about the day ahead. Not because anything special was planned, just regular Tuesday classes and homework, but because I felt this underlying current of aliveness that made everything seem more interesting. Getting ready that morning, I found myself taking a little more care with my appearance, but not from insecurity. It felt like self-expression, like I was dressing for the joy of it rather than trying to hide or compensate for anything. In my interpersonal communications class, when we broke into small groups to discuss conflict resolution strategies, I naturally became the person who kept the conversation flowing and made sure everyone felt heard, not because I forced myself to step up, but because it felt right to use my voice that way. After class, a girl named Maya, who I'd admired from afar all semester, came up to me and said, "I love your energy. Want to grab coffee sometime?" Maya, the girl who always seemed effortlessly cool, who spoke up in every class with these insightful comments, who I'd assumed was way out of my league friendship-wise. She wanted to grab coffee with me. That's when I knew the program was actually working. But understanding that it was working and understanding why it was working were two different things. It wasn't until later that week, during my coffee date with Maya, that I got clarity on what was really happening. "You have this really calm confidence," she told me over our lattes. "Like, you're obviously smart and have things to say, but you're not trying to prove anything to anyone. It's refreshing." Calm confidence. That phrase stuck with me because it perfectly described what I was experiencing. I wasn't becoming louder or more aggressive or putting on some kind of performance. I was becoming more myself, just a version of myself that believed she deserved to take up space. The hypnosis wasn't changing my personality. It was removing the barriers that had been keeping my real personality hidden. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been wearing sunglasses your whole life and you think the world is naturally dim. Then someone removes the glasses and suddenly you realize the world was bright all along. You just couldn't see it clearly. That's what was happening to my self-perception. The hypnosis was removing the glasses of limiting beliefs, and I was finally seeing myself as I actually was, rather than as I'd been conditioned to believe I was. By the end of week 1, people were definitely noticing something different about me. My roommate asked if I'd started taking vitamins. A guy from my study group complimented my vibe. Even my mom, during our weekly FaceTime call, said I seemed lighter somehow. But the most significant change wasn't how others saw me. It was how I was beginning to see myself. For the first time in years, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't immediately catalog my flaws. I just saw me, a person who was worthy of love and attention and good things, a person who had something valuable to offer the world. It sounds simple, but for someone who had spent years believing the opposite, it felt revolutionary. The wild part was that this transformation was happening entirely outside my conscious control. I wasn't trying to be more confident or working on my self-esteem during the day. I was just living my normal life while my subconscious mind was quietly installing new programming every night. It was like having a team of expert renovators work on your house while you sleep. And each morning you wake up to find another room has been beautifully updated. But I was about to learn that renovation projects don't always go smoothly. Sometimes you have to tear down walls before you can build something better. And my subconscious was preparing to demolish some very old, very stubborn walls that had been holding me back for years. Week 2 would test everything I thought I'd learned about this process. Week 2 started with the new track, Releasing Limiting Beliefs. The description promised it would gently dissolve old patterns of self-doubt while reinforcing your natural magnetism and worth. It sounded perfect, exactly what I needed to build on the momentum from week 1. What I got instead felt like emotional whiplash. The first few nights of the new track were fine. I fell asleep to affirmations about releasing fear, embracing my power, letting go of what no longer served me. But by Thursday of week 2, I started having the most unsettling dreams of my life. I dreamed I was back in 7th grade, reliving every awkward, painful moment with vivid clarity. The time I tripped walking up to receive an award and everyone laughed. The party where I sat alone on the couch while everyone else danced. The day Jake Morrison told his friends he would never date me because I was weird looking. These weren't just memories, they were emotional re-experiences. I woke up feeling 13 years old again, raw and vulnerable and convinced that everyone could see how fundamentally unlovable I was. The rational part of my mind knew these were just dreams, probably part of the releasing process the track was designed to facilitate. But the emotional part didn't care about logic. It felt like someone had ripped open every insecurity I'd spent years trying to forget. During the day, the confidence I'd felt in week 1 seemed to evaporate. I went back to hunching my shoulders, avoiding eye contact, second-guessing everything I said. In psychology class, when Professor Chen asked another question, my hand stayed firmly in my lap, even though I knew the answer. Maya texted me about our next coffee date, and instead of feeling excited, I felt anxious. What if week 1 had been a fluke? What if she realized I wasn't actually the cool, confident person she thought I was? I made an excuse about being too busy with midterms. By the end of week 2, I was seriously considering quitting the program. But then I remembered something the creator had mentioned in the materials. Week 2 is where most people give up because it's when the subconscious starts releasing what it's been holding on to. Trust the process. I decided to push through to week 3. Week 3's track was called Embodying Confidence, and honestly, it felt like a joke at that point. How was I supposed to embody confidence when I could barely make eye contact with the barista at Starbucks? The first few nights of week 3 were more of the same emotional turbulence. Weird dreams, mood swings, moments where I felt like I was losing my grip on who I was supposed to be. But then something interesting happened around day 20. I woke up feeling neutral. Not confident, not insecure, just neutral. Like my emotional temperature had finally regulated after weeks of running hot and cold. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable. And after the chaos of week 2, stable felt like progress. The neutrality lasted for most of week 3 and all of week 4. I wasn't experiencing the breakthroughs of week 1, but I also wasn't having the emotional crashes of week 2. I was just existing. Going to classes, doing homework, having normal interactions with people. It felt like nothing was happening, and that's what almost made me quit. Here's the thing about transformation that nobody tells you. The most important changes often happen during the boring phases. While I was feeling like nothing was changing, my subconscious was actually doing the heavy lifting of integration. All those old beliefs that had surfaced during week 2 weren't just random emotional purging. They were being systematically deactivated and replaced with the new programming I'd been receiving every night. But that process doesn't feel dramatic when it's happening. It feels like nothing. Think of it like physical therapy after an injury. The acute pain phase gets all the attention, and the final recovery phase feels victorious. But the middle phase, where you're doing boring exercises every day and progress feels impossibly slow, is actually when the most healing happens. That's where I was during weeks 3 and 4. In the boring, necessary phase where my subconscious was rewiring itself at a fundamental level. I almost missed the subtle signs that things were actually shifting. I stopped apologizing before stating my opinions in class discussions. I didn't consciously decide to do this. I just noticed one day that I was saying, I think, instead of sorry, but I think. I started taking up more physical space, sitting with my shoulders back instead of hunched forward, walking with a longer stride, not automatically stepping aside when someone was walking toward me on the sidewalk. My skin was definitely looking better, even during the stress of midterms when it should have been breaking out. I wasn't doing anything different with my skincare routine, but there was a subtle glow that people started commenting on. Most significantly, I stopped constantly checking my reflection in store windows and bathroom mirrors. For years, I'd been compulsively checking my appearance, trying to catch myself looking bad so I could fix it. But somewhere during week 4, I just stopped caring so much about constant self-monitoring. These changes were so gradual that I barely noticed them happening. It wasn't until Maya texted me again about getting coffee, this time I said yes immediately without overthinking it, that I realized something had fundamentally shifted. We met at this cute cafe near campus, and within 5 minutes, I could tell she was more relaxed around me than she'd been during our first coffee date. Not because I was trying harder to be charming, but because I was trying less. I was just being myself without the constant background noise of self-consciousness. You seem really comfortable with yourself, she said about halfway through our conversation. Like, genuinely comfortable, not just putting on confidence. And it's cool to be around. That's when it hit me. The plateau hadn't been a stall in my progress. It had been the period when the changes became integrated into my actual personality instead of just being temporary experiences. Week 1 had been like getting a preview of my potential, exciting but unstable. Week 2 had been the demolition phase, messy but necessary. Weeks 3 and 4 had been the foundation work, boring but essential. By the end of week 4, I wasn't having dramatic moments of feeling transformed. I was just consistently being the version of myself that felt most natural and authentic, which as it turned out, was a version I actually liked spending time with. The real test came during midterm week. In previous semesters, exam stress turned me into an anxious mess. I'd stress eat, break out, stay up too late cramming, and generally make myself miserable. But this time, even though I was studying just as hard, I felt steady. When I didn't know an answer on my psychology midterm, instead of spiraling into panic, I just moved on to the next question. When I had to give a presentation in my communications class, I felt nervous but not paralyzed. I presented my ideas clearly, made eye contact with the audience, and actually enjoyed the experience of sharing what I'd learned. My roommate noticed the difference. "You're handling midterms way better than usual," she said one evening, as I was calmly highlighting textbook chapters while she stress ate chips and complained about her workload. "Yeah," I said, and realized it was true. I guess I am. But the most telling moment came during my statistics exam, historically my most dreaded subject. I was working through a particularly complex problem when I got stuck. In the past, this would have sent me into a mental spiral. You're going to fail, you're not smart enough for this, everyone else understands and you don't. But this time, the self-critical voices were just quiet. Instead of panicking, I took a deep breath, skipped the problem, finished the rest of the exam, and came back to it with a clear head. I still didn't know the answer immediately, but I was able to work through it step by step without my inner critic sabotaging my thinking process. I walked out of that exam feeling proud of myself, not because I was certain I'd aced it, but because I'd stayed calm and done my best under pressure. That sense of quiet self-respect was something I'd never experienced before. By the time I finished my last midterm, I realized that weeks 3 and 4 hadn't been a plateau at all. They'd been the period when my new self-concept had solidified from a temporary experience into a stable foundation. I was no longer someone who occasionally felt confident. I was someone who fundamentally believed she was worthy of respect, including her own. The change was so complete that I almost couldn't remember what it felt like to constantly doubt myself. But I was about to discover that true transformation isn't just about changing how you see yourself. It's about being seen by others through the lens of your new self-concept, and that's when things got really interesting. Week 5 started with track 4, embodying your highest self. The description promised it would help me step fully into your magnetic presence and authentic power. After the slow burn of weeks 3 and 4, I was ready for something more dynamic. What I got was beyond anything I could have expected. The track itself felt different from the previous ones. Where the earlier recordings had been gentle and nurturing, this one had an almost electric energy to it. The background frequencies seemed to vibrate at a higher level, and the affirmations were more declarative. You are magnetic. You are powerful. You are the main character of your own life. But the real shift didn't happen during the hypnosis sessions. It happened on a random Wednesday morning when I was getting ready for class. I was standing in front of my closet, reaching for my usual uniform of jeans and an oversized hoodie when something made me pause. Instead, I found myself pulling out this dress I'd bought months ago but never worn, a fitted black dress that I'd always thought was too much for just going to class. I put it on and looked in the mirror, and for the first time in my life, I didn't immediately start cataloging what was wrong with my appearance. Instead, I had this moment of genuine appreciation for how I looked. Not in an arrogant way, just in a simple, matter-of-fact way. I look good. But the real breakthrough happened when I walked into my psychology lecture wearing that dress. Professor Chen was discussing social psychology and the concept of presence, how some people naturally command attention in a room without trying. As he was talking, I realized people were looking at me, not staring, but definitely noticing me in a way they hadn't before. The guy who sat 2 rows ahead of me, someone I'd had a silent crush on all semester, turned around and smiled when I walked in. Not a polite smile, but a genuine, interested smile that made my stomach flutter. During the lecture, when Professor Chen asked for examples of charismatic leaders, my hand went up automatically. But this time, instead of offering a safe textbook answer, I shared a personal story about my high school student body president and why her authenticity made people want to follow her. The response was immediate. People were nodding, leaning forward, genuinely engaged with what I was saying. Professor Chen looked impressed and said, "That's a perfect example of authentic charisma. Thank you." After class, 3 different people approached me. The guy from 2 rows ahead introduced himself, his name was Marcus, and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. A girl from my study group complimented my dress and wanted to know where I got it. Even a random classmate stopped me to say my comment had really resonated with her. Walking across campus after that class, I felt like I was moving through the world differently. My steps were longer, my posture naturally straighter, my gaze more direct. I wasn't trying to be confident, I just was confident. It felt as natural as breathing. That afternoon, I had my shift at the campus bookstore where I worked part-time. Usually it was pretty mundane, checking out textbooks, answering questions about store policies, counting down the hours until I could leave. But that day, everything felt different. Customers were more friendly, more talkative. My coworker, Jake, who had barely acknowledged my existence in the 3 months we'd been working together, suddenly seemed interested in having actual conversations. My manager, Mrs. Peterson, complimented my positive energy and asked if I'd be interested in training new employees. The strangest part was that I wasn't doing anything differently. I wasn't trying harder to be charming or putting on some kind of performance. If anything, I was being more authentically myself than I'd ever been. But that authentic self was apparently someone people wanted to be around. The real test came that evening when Maya and I went to a party hosted by one of her friends. In my old reality, parties were anxiety-inducing social minefields where I spent most of my time finding corners to hide in or helping the host with cleanup so I'd have something to do with my hands. I'd go because I didn't want to seem antisocial, but I'd usually leave early with some excuse about having to study. But walking into this party, I felt completely different. Not nervous or excited, just present, ready to engage with whatever the evening brought. Within 15 minutes, I was in the middle of a fascinating conversation with a group of people I'd never met before about travel experiences and cultural differences. I wasn't dominating the conversation, but I was fully participating, sharing stories, asking questions, genuinely interested in connecting with these new people. Marcus was there, the guy from my psychology class, and when he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made it clear he was happy to see me. We ended up talking for hours about everything from philosophy to our worst childhood fears to our favorite conspiracy theories. "You're not what I expected," he said at one point. "What did you expect?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, smiling. Someone more guarded, I guess. You seem so open and confident, like you're comfortable with exactly who you are." The crazy thing was, he was right. I was comfortable with who I was. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't monitoring myself or trying to figure out how I was coming across. I was just being myself and trusting that myself was enough. Around midnight, when people started talking about going to this late night diner, Marcus asked if I wanted to join them. 6 months ago, I would have made an excuse about being tired or having early classes, but instead, I said yes immediately. We spent another 2 hours at the diner, and I found myself naturally becoming the person who kept the conversation flowing, who made sure everyone felt included, who suggested games when the energy started to lag. Not because I was trying to be the center of attention, but because facilitating connection felt natural and fun. When Marcus walked me back to my dorm at 3 a.m., he asked if he could see me again soon. I'd really like that, I said, and meant it completely. Standing outside my residence hall, looking up at him in the soft glow of the campus streetlights, I had this moment of clarity about what had actually changed over the past 5 weeks. I hadn't become a different person. I'd become more myself. All those years of feeling invisible, awkward, like I didn't quite fit anywhere, that hadn't been the real me. That had been the me that was convinced she wasn't worthy of attention, connection, or love. The me that was so focused on trying not to be rejected that she never showed anyone who she actually was. But the hypnosis had been systematically dismantling those protective barriers, replacing the beliefs that kept me small with beliefs that allowed me to expand into who I'd always been underneath. The girl who could command attention in a room without trying, she'd always been there. The girl who could connect authentically with strangers, she'd always been there. The girl who could inspire others to open up and share their stories, she'd always been there. I'd just been too afraid to let her out. That night, as I got ready for bed and queued up track 4 for the 5th time, I looked in the bathroom mirror and felt a rush of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The girl looking back at me was radiant. Not because of makeup or lighting, but because of the energy she was carrying. She looked like someone who knew her own worth, who believed she deserved good things, who expected to be treated with respect and kindness. She looked like the main character of her own life. But as I was about to learn, stepping into your power doesn't just change how you see yourself. It changes how everyone around you responds to you. And not everyone is ready for your transformation. Over the next 3 weeks, I would discover both the incredible gifts and the unexpected challenges that come with claiming your authentic confidence in a world that's often more comfortable with women who play small.